Welcome to It's a Yes, Making It in Media.
I'm Jo Wood.
And I'm Debra Sharron. Between us, we've spent many years helping people build successful media careers, from first jobs to senior leadership.
Each week, we answer real questions from our listeners, covering everything from interviews to sales conversations with clear, practical advice.
If you're ambitious, capable, and ready to take control of your career, you're in the right place. So today we're going to be talking about what happens when you reach a career crossroads, the point at which you have to make a decision as to whether you're going to stay, pivot, or run.
How exciting.
Well, it's your bread and butter, isn't it, really, Jo? That's when people come to you.
And this year, I think that there are lots of people out there who've got a very negative perspective on what the media market looks like in terms of jobs. And that's probably making them feel very anxious when they're thinking about whether they should stay.
Every level, do you think that there's that level of concern?
Sadly, media sometimes gets embroiled in the pessimistic view. And if you look on LinkedIn, you'll see loads of posts of people who are worried about the big companies, the agencies, some of the big tech companies who've just repeatedly posted their redundancies. And then they perceive that the whole industry is full of redundancies. And whilst there's no question that it has been a little bit more competitive over the last 18 months or so, it's nowhere near the doom and gloom. I mean, if you look on Google at the moment, it will tell you that, vacancies are down by 6 or 7%. Yeah, that it's been a consistent downward fall over a long time. And actually, from a recruitment company perspective, we haven't seen that at all. It's more challenging, it is competitive, but it's always challenging and competitive. Yeah. And if you're the right person and you're going for the right role, you still have a very good chance of securing something.
Well, that makes perfect sense, because I always look at the figures of total ad spend across the UK, across all media, and consistently those figures go up and up and up. And I think that the forecast now is at about £40 billion being spent by UK businesses on advertising. So if the spend levels are going up so significantly, then you're going to need people to be able to monetize opportunities. So it makes sense that what you're saying is that people should be more optimistic maybe than the headlines would suggest.
I definitely think that. And obviously everybody's also worried about the impact of AI on media jobs. And there's no question that some jobs will go. But everybody worried in the same way when digital arrived, and it created different jobs. And I'm quite sure that will happen again. And some of the jobs that may well arise are the jobs that people haven't even thought about yet and
yes.
don't know what they might be. So on the one hand, whilst I think that employers are definitely raising the bar and that some vacancies in some areas have diminished a little bit, the good thing is that salaries have definitely increased. In fact, that on Google suggests has gone up by sort of 8 or 9%. So companies will pay for the right person.
Yes.
And that makes a really big difference as well.
So one of the things that always interests me when I'm training is that occasionally in a tea break or a coffee break, someone will come up to me and say, I've really been enjoying my time in this company, but actually I'm thinking about making a move. What do you think? And what's the market looking like right now? And it's always a bit of a surprise, and it's a difficult conversation to have, because they might be doing really well in the company that they're in. And maybe they've demonstrated in the training room that they are really capable and competent. When they then come and have that conversation, what do you think might be going wrong that's led them to the point of perhaps considering that their next step has to be to leave?
One of the things you need to factor in is that salespeople are always looking for the next best thing.
So they should be,
that's
I guess.
Intrinsic in their nature. And so it's often when things are going really well, that's the moment when they sort of start to get itchy feet and think, I need to move on. Yeah. And the question is it the right time to go? Yeah. Or should they stay longer? And what can they do to make the role that they have more interesting? Or actually, does that not exist in the company that they're in? And do they need to sort of expand their skills and go somewhere else? And that's the question that, as you say, people who are doing really well, are constantly thinking about.
It also makes me wonder about the relationship they have with their line manager, because if they're talking to a trainer about their concerns, you'd hope that the manager had an awareness that this high-performing individual was looking for the next challenge. So I guess managers today need to be very mindful of the fact that every salesperson that's worth their salt might be looking for their next opportunity to grow.
managers also have their own situation to consider, because when they've got good people in their team, they don't want to lose them. And there is that balance between, should this person objectively be looking to expand their skills and ability by taking a role somewhere else, or can I hold on to them longer because they're doing great for my revenue figures, and the last thing I want is for them to move on. And there is a difficult balance, and the best managers understand that people will want to move on, and can see the value in introducing new talent at the bottom end of their team to build them up and start again. But it is an ongoing consideration.
I think that's right. And therefore, the question, I suppose, is what are the key skills this year that you think that a successful media seller needs to be focusing on in order to add to their value in the market?
My view has always been that any experience that you can get in any avenue outside of your core role will be advantageous for you in terms of what your next move might be. So if somebody is sort of doing a delegate sales type role, or something which is an entry level position, if they can mentor, work with somebody doing the next stage up, whether that's something a bit more creative or something more agency focused, or working on a particular client category, if they could just work with somebody or just a little bit, or spend a bit of time, then they can acquire an insight into what those roles might look like and know whether or not that's the direction they'd like to go in.
I think one of the things that I've recognised is that very often a salesperson now is being asked to sell a portfolio solution. They've got to sell more than one thing simultaneously. So if they've been working in an environment where they've just had one particular opportunity, perhaps what they want to be making sure that they're ready to do is to go to market and know how to sell something broader, so that they can have more concise conversations with clients, but being able to be ready to try and deliver a bigger opportunity in the marketplace. I think that perhaps is a big step for people to take, because they've got to be comfortable with how they sell more than one product. I think the other thing is that many salespeople are challenged from agencies and clients to demonstrate the return on the investment that that client or agency has made. And that terrifies a lot of salespeople, because they're always nervous about being transparent, or they don't necessarily feel they've got a handle on the numbers. So it feels to me that this year, salespeople need to be able to bite the bullet and know how to have conversations about performance. And that was something that perhaps we didn't have to focus on so much in the past. It was about brand building, or it was about being in the right space. But now accountability on any kind of campaign perhaps requires a seller to have a little bit more focus on what that solution actually delivered. I really am noticing that there's a lot of people who say, when you're listening to interviews or podcasts like this, that they were never any good at maths. And they labelled themselves from a very young age at being very bad at maths. And they've almost discounted that side of their ability or their skill set, because they've seen themselves as being better at languages or better at the arts. And actually, for somebody today operating in the media landscape, if you have got that attitude, that may make you very nervous about making the transition into being comfortable talking about campaign performance and data, where actually it's really important to feel moderately comfortable with numbers and to open your mind to that ability.
That's definitely really interesting, because historically, if you took a snapshot of the media industry, we always found that the best graduate entry level people had studied geography.
Interesting.
However, latterly, a lot of entry level roles, particularly in the digital programmatic space, they're very interested in people who've got degrees in maths or stats or economics, which is an entirely different skill set.
Yes.
And admittedly, that's often more for operations roles or data, but nonetheless, that's definitely.
But it's creeping into every role.
Completely.
So you've got to be able to perhaps talk a little bit about being comfortable, even if you're not a mathematician.
Completely. So that takes us right back to the, do you stay? Do you go? Do you look for something new? At the end of the day, every individual has to evaluate their own personal situation. And the key thing here is to actually ask yourself, why are you interested in leaving in the first instance? Or why would you be interested in a different type of job? And what other things would you like to learn? Can you upskill? Can you work with somebody who will help you in the environment in which you're in? Should you look to change the role a little bit? Or is there a role you can aspire to internally, or should you actually bite the bullet and leave?
So you should really be looking at where you might have some gaps in your skill set and see whether in the role you're in at the moment, there's an opportunity to be able to invest in your own development. You and I have talked before about whether it is today damaging to have too many changes in your CV.
18 months is definitely the key moment when people start to think, I'm good at this, what next? And then that happens again at around the 3-4 years mark. I think hiring managers should be aware of that. I know of a few companies where they specifically looked at those points in time and what they should be considering and how to deal with their salespeople along the way.
And before we dive into the questions, I just wanted to ask you whether you're seeing this in the UK, the idea of a stay interview. Is that something that is quite commonplace?
So you mean the kind of thing where you're interviewed internally to see whether or not there's an opportunity or what might encourage you to stay? Or...
Well, where I've heard about this is where a company at those key milestones that you've just described will proactively sit down and have a stay interview with their members of their teams to see what they need as an individual to stay within that organisation. So rather than a exit interview, which we all know what that looks like, actually something which is really biting that bullet and saying, okay, we want you to stay. What do we need to do to support your career growth in this company?
Well, to the best of my knowledge, no one has introduced a stay interview, but an appraisal meeting,
Sure.
which to actually look at what you're looking for next, how you view your career developing, what skill set you're looking for, and putting a plan of action in place to see how to enable you to acquire those skills. That definitely has happened. And I think most media companies have that in place in some form or other.
Yes.
I think the bigger issue is whether the actions that are discussed in those meetings are actually implemented, because it's really easy to say to somebody, this is what you need to do. It's much harder to actually take action that you know might ultimately end up in that person moving on from your team into a different part of the company.
So it doesn't become a box ticking exercise, which I think it can be. I think there's something interesting about the language of this, that stay interview suggests we're positively encouraging you to stay in the business. Appraisal feels a bit like your end of term report and is quite old-fashioned language.
Let's face it, the factors that make people start to think about moving on are partially around the role itself, always from a salesperson's perspective around the money, and then about the future. If I do stay, what are my longer term goals? And the other thing you mentioned, churn. So actually, should I change jobs every 18 months? Is my CV then going to look like a mess, right? At the other end of the scale, it's possible in media to stay in a company for too long. If you stay in a job which is too similar for too long without having very clear promotional opportunities along the way, you look like somebody who's just a plodder, and no one wants that to happen.
Yes.
And sometimes if you're very comfortable in your role and you like the people you work with and you're working for a company that supports you well, it's very difficult to take an objective view about where you are and wonder whether or not it's time to move on.
Yes. Yeah. Well, maybe we should look at some questions now.
I definitely think we should.
Okay, so the first question here is from Jonty, who's emailing us from Cardiff. Jonty asks, should I stay specialist in one media channel, like digital or audio, or become a generalist across all platforms?
That's a question, Jonty, that we get asked an awful lot. And in actual fact, my gut instinct would be to say to you, it's really good to become a generalist across everything. However, the further up you get in your career, the more valuable it might be to specialise in something. It's difficult because if you have broad media experience, that enables you to have an objective view across all media and offer your clients and agencies a wider perspective. However, often some of the senior roles that we get are wanting somebody who knows something specific about audio or digital or whatever it is. Now, all of that said, most roles these days enable you to have a handle on everything.
I think this is an interesting and important question because media channels, the lines have become blurred, haven't they? So it feels to me that maybe you develop your confidence and your prowess working in one particular field, but actually to be very media literate, to keep informed about the shifts, the changes and the trends that are going on is very important, and to have the right language to show that you understand that media is an ever-evolving landscape
what I'm thinking about is some of the job descriptions that we have, where in certain instances, there's no question that they would be looking for a specialist in digital or a specialist in out of home. But within the interview process, we will push to say, would you look at somebody with a different media background? And the answer is often yes. So I think it really depends on the level of role.
Do you think, Jo, if you're a good salesperson in out of home, that you have the skills to be able to make an easy transition into audio?
Quite honestly, I think if you're a good salesperson and you understand the value in building connections and clients and agency contacts, you can do that in anything. I think the best salespeople have a real empathy and understanding with their market. So some people absolutely love out of home or love the broadcast media sector, and that probably makes them a better salesperson in those areas. But actually, the skills are totally transferable.
Yeah.
And unless for a particular role, they're looking for very specific client contacts or very specific agency contacts, I absolutely think you can switch from one media to another.
I think it's really worthwhile that anyone perhaps like Jonty, who is thinking which kind of environment do I want to sell in, knows where to go to find industry information that might be useful for them. So maybe being able to find the IAB or be part of the IAB to know what's going on in the internet advertising world, or being able to look at something like the PPA or Magnetic to see what the trends are in consumer publishing. Just keeping up to date with the right resources to understand what's going on across the market is useful.
I hope that answers your question, Jonty.
Now, we're the first to admit that we don't have all the answers, which is why from time to time we're thrilled to be joined by some real industry giants and friends of the podcast to help us tackle your questions.
We're delighted to have Jo Redfern joining us today. Jo launched Education Cubed, a niche agency operating at the intersection of education, data and insight. She brings a strong understanding of how to create a niche and build a new business in media. Welcome to the show, Jo.
Well, we were going to kick off, Jo, by asking you can help a listener who's written in saying that they're frustrated because they're not currently getting promoted and they don't know why, and they need some help in being able to work out how to be able to deal with that conundrum. Can you help?
Well, I hope I can. And you're right, it is a conundrum. And I faced it myself in early days of media sales, really. And the shocking truth is it's not good enough just to be good at your job, hitting your targets and sitting quietly and getting on with it and getting on with your line manager. That's great. But wanting to get promoted takes a bit more work. And my experience, and I did a session on it a couple of years ago, funny enough, around politics and internal influence, which I've drawn on to answer this question, really. The first thing is, in most organizations, it's not just one person that's making the decision about whether you get promoted or not. So, it's about identifying who in your world, your work world, is involved in making that decision. Your line manager, your line manager's manager. Is there a wider leadership team, HR, finance, and anyone who's an influence on that group? So identifying them and get on their radar. Not the most easy thing, but find an opportunity to volunteer for something if there's a wider company bit of work going on, or speaking at an all-staff event. Just kind of get on people's radar. And then when you've kind of identified that, there's a really useful tool, which is the yes but. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. Yeah, there's nodding.
Yeah. Tell us what your experience of that is.
Well, my experience initially about getting promoted is the first ever role I went for to take over a small sales team. I didn't get the key is to ask for feedback and really understand what it is. And so I did. I asked for feedback after I'd kind of licked my wounds for a while. And, they told me, yes, we know that you've hit all your targets, but. And so for anyone that's in this position, think about that group of people that you've identified that will have influence over your next job role. Imagine them in a room where you're being discussed as a candidate for the next promotion, and answer what that but is. Could be, got no experience of, £1 million campaigns, or, is only used to one vertical, or whatever it might be, and tackle it, address it, understand it. And that kind of feedback loop is super important. Yeah. So that's my advice.
So it's not channeling all of your expectations in one person, but actually broadening the net and being able to sell yourself across the decision-making unit.
Yeah. And not just for this role, but for other roles too. And that's work politics a bit, isn't it? Instinctively, as salespeople, you get validation because you've hit a target and that, you've achieved something really good. But it is more than that. It is more than that.
Okay, hope that helps. Dev from Liverpool has sent an email in. Dev is saying, I'm being headhunted by a competitor with better money, but my current company has a great culture. How do I decide whether to move? Culture or cash? What do you think?
It's neither. Yeah, it's neither. Why are you having the conversations in the first instance, Dev? What would you be looking for that you don't have in your current role? The fact that you're even interested to have the conversation suggests that there might be something else beyond the culture or the cash that is making you think it's time to move on. If it's just cash, probably no, unless you can really achieve a significant increase by moving. And even then, you've got to be sure that the new company can offer you an environment in which you'd be happy. And that can be tricky to evaluate. If you like the culture, but you're being held in there by the culture and not much else in terms of long-term career opportunity, then it is time to move on, because there are lots of great companies with lots of great cultures.
I think sometimes if you've worked in an organisation where the culture is fabulous and you've been there for a while and maybe it's your first job, you make an assumption that you'll get paid more somewhere else, and you will assume that some of the things which are a given in a great culture you're going to find with your new employer. And I can think of quite a few examples of people who've made that sort of move only to really miss some of the things that they thought were very basic in terms of the joy of coming to work and working within a team that was fully recognised and motivated.
So one of the things that I always say to people when we're interviewing in the first instance is really think and reflect, what do I want? And at every stage during an interview process, ask the questions that you may consider as basic. Things like, why did the last person leave? Why have you got this vacancy? What is the culture really like here? How long do people stay for? What do you do socially? So that you get a better understanding of the things and that nothing will be a shock as and when you leave.
What do you think defines a culture? When you think culture is a word that people use a lot, what do you think that means?
It can actually be nothing more or less than a feeling that you have. Certainly if you go for an interview with a company, understanding what their culture feels like can be just about how the person interviewing you engages with you, how they talk about their team, how they talk about the company in the future. And that is something which it's very difficult to separate from that gut instinct. I like these people. I feel like I could work in their environment. The problem is that sometimes it's easy for a company to convey a particular culture through an interview process, and the reality may not be exactly the same.
I think culture is a bit of an intangible term. I'm thinking of an organisation where people didn't love going to work. That company got absorbed into another company where the culture was completely changed. They implemented different ways of working, and suddenly people doing exactly the same job had a greater joy in the work that they were doing because the environment was managed in a way that changed the dynamic of everyday working, whether you were working remotely or you were working in the office.
We've done a lot of talking, but what is it that you really think makes somebody stick, look for change, or leave?
I'm always reminded of a course that I went on. What was taught to us really has stuck with me, which is when you're in a position where you've got to make a decision and you're not really sure what the right way to go might be, you've really only ever got three choices. So do you change it? Do you live with it? Or do you get out of it? And I think we've really looked at all of those different options as we've been exploring some of these questions today. Change it, live with it, or get out of it. And actually make an informed decision based on those three options.
Yes, and those three options are personal. It may not be the same for somebody else in your environment, but if it feels right for you, that's the thing that you should pursue.
Our Yes List recommendation this week is the American drama series based on the advertising industry in New York 1960s. It's Mad Men on Netflix. Stick with me here. The workplace behaviour is absolutely not what we're recommending, but the pitchcraft? Masterclass. Watch how Don Draper doesn't sell products, he sells emotions and aspirations. That Kodak carousel pitch in Series 1, he takes a slide projector and turns it into a time machine for nostalgia. That's the level of storytelling we should all aspire to in media sales. You'll also see how to handle difficult clients and understand what they really want versus what they say they want. Top takeout, stop leading with audience data and rate cards. Lead with the business problem you're solving. Frame your media solution around their commercial objectives: brand awareness, market share, customer acquisition, not just your inventory. Just remember, steal the pitch techniques, not the 3 martini lunches. The link's in the show notes.
Thanks for listening to It's a Yes, Making It in Media.
Do follow the show and share it with someone who's serious about getting results in their media career. If you found today's episode useful, we're running a live and interactive Zoom training workshop very soon. Just click on the link in the show notes for all the details. We'd love to see you there.